On Christmas morning last year, at exactly 8:12 a.m., my stepmother handed me a black trash bag and told me I had 15 minutes to get my daughter and leave the house my father bought for $2.4 million. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She just stood there in a cream cashmere sweater, holding a mug that said, "Blessed," like she was asking me to take out the garbage. If you've ever been thrown out of your own childhood home on Christmas, you know something strange happens inside your chest. It doesn't shatter all at once. It freezes. Before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something. Have you ever realized, in one single moment, that someone you trusted had been quietly preparing to erase you from your own life? If you have, tell me in the comments. And if stories about quiet revenge and emotional justice hit a little too close to home, go ahead and subscribe now. Because this one, it took a year to unfold. My name is Marissa Holt. I was 29 years old that Christmas, a single mother running a small hair salon in Dayton, Ohio. My shop was nothing glamorous. 4 chairs, a cracked mirror in the back, and a neon open sign that flickered when it rained. But it was mine, and I had built it after my husband walked out when our daughter Lily was 6 months old. Lily was 5. The Christmas. Everything collapsed. She still believed in Santa, still believed adults kept their promises. That morning, she was sitting cross-legged on the floor of my father's living room, wearing red pajamas with reindeer on them, carefully opening a box of crayons. She didn't understand why her grandmother, no, my stepmother, was standing over us with that trash bag. Her name was Denise Carter Holt, and the first time I ever heard her voice, 12 years earlier, she had been laughing in my father's kitchen, like she already owned it. My father, Richard Holt, married her when I was 17. He was 62. She was 36. Even then, I knew exactly what she was. But my father looked happy. And after my mother died when I was 14, I learned to accept happiness wherever he could find it. For years, Denise played the perfect role. She baked pies for holidays. She called me sweetheart. She posted Facebook photos with captions like, "Family is everything." But there was always something behind her smile, something calculating. And I didn't fully understand it until the year my father got sick. He was diagnosed with congestive heart failure 18 months before that Christmas. Stage 4. Doctors gave him maybe 2 years. That was when Denise began changing. Slowly at first, she took over his finances. Then she insisted he add her name to property accounts. Then she told me it would be less stressful if she handled his medical decisions. And when I tried to visit, she always had a reason why it wasn't a good time. He's resting. He's tired. He doesn't want visitors. But every time I did see him, he would squeeze my hand and whisper the same thing. "Don't let Denise push you away." At the time, I thought he meant emotionally. I didn't realize he meant literally. That Christmas morning, Denise didn't argue. She didn't threaten. She simply said Richard needs peace, and you and your situation are too stressful. By situation, she meant my divorce, my small business debt, being a single mom. She had always hated that I wasn't polished enough for her social circle. "You have 15 minutes, she repeated, glancing at her phone. "If you're not out, I'll call the police for trespassing." I remember the exact second something inside me went cold. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was clarity, because I realized she had planned this. No one throws someone out that calmly without preparing for it. I looked at her and asked quietly, "Does Dad know you're doing this?" She smiled. Not kindly, not even cruelly, just confidently. "He's not in a condition to discuss these things." That sentence, that one sentence, it was the first open crack in her mask. Lily came over and tugged my sleeve. "Mommy, are we going home?" I knelt down and kissed her forehead. "Yes, baby, we're going home." And in that moment, I made a silent promise. I would never let her see me beg. We packed in silence. Clothes, Lily's stuffed rabbit, a photo of my mother. When we walked out the front door, Denise stood in the entryway, watching us like she was observing a completed task. No guilt, no hesitation, just satisfaction. As I buckled Lily into the car, I looked back at the house, the place where I had grown up, where my father had taught me to ride a bike, where he had cried at my high school graduation. And Denise was already closing the door, like we had never existed. That night, Lily fell asleep on my couch in the tiny apartment above my salon. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone. There was one message from my father, sent 3 days earlier. "I need to talk to you about something important. Denise doesn't know." At the time, I thought it was about his health. I didn't know it was about everything. I didn't know that 1 month later he would die, and that when the will was read, it would reveal a number that would change Denise's life forever. $52 million. And here's the part that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. Denise believed every penny belonged to her. She had no idea what my father had done before he died. And neither did I. Not yet. 4 weeks after Christmas, at exactly 2:03 p.m. on a freezing Thursday afternoon, I received a voicemail that changed the direction of my entire life. "Miss Holt, this is Attorney Benjamin Clark from Dayton Probate Services. I need you to come in regarding your father's estate. This is urgent." He didn't sound sympathetic. He sounded formal, professional, and strangely cautious. At that moment, I was sweeping hair clippings off the floor of my salon. The heater rattled in the corner, and outside slush from melted snow dragged brown lines across the sidewalk. For a second, I just stood there with the broom in my hand, staring at my phone, because I already knew what the call meant. My father was gone. Denise hadn't even told me. I found out from a stranger. Have you ever learned someone you loved died from a voicemail instead of family? If you have, you know how that silence afterward feels heavier than any scream. Lily was coloring at the back table. She looked up when she saw my face. "Mommy, what's wrong?" I forced a smile that felt like it cracked across my skin. "Grandpa went to heaven, sweetheart." She froze. Then her lower lip trembled. "But he said he'd come to my birthday." Her birthday was in 2 weeks. I nodded slowly. "I know." That night, after Lily fell asleep, I sat alone in the salon chair my father had bought me when I opened the shop 3 years earlier. He paid $12,000 for all 4 stations because he said, "If you're going to build something, you build it right." I ran my fingers along the armrest, and I cried for exactly 10 minutes. Then I stopped, because grief wasn't the only thing sitting in my chest. There was something else, something colder. Denise had cut me off from him during his final weeks. She had controlled access, controlled information, controlled everything, and now she hadn't even called to tell me he was gone. That wasn't just cruelty. That was strategy. The next morning, I drove to the probate office downtown. The building was old, red brick, narrow windows, the kind of place that smelled like paper and coffee. Attorney Benjamin Clark greeted me in a conference room. He was in his late 50s, with steel gray hair and the expression of someone who had delivered difficult news for decades. He didn't waste time. "Miss Holt," he said carefully, folding his hands before we discussed details, "I need to ask, when was the last time you spoke with your father directly?" I blinked. "Christmas Eve, briefly." Denise said he was too tired for calls after that. He nodded slowly, like that confirmed something. Then he slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents stamped with official seals, estate valuation summaries, trust statements, asset breakdowns. The numbers made my stomach drop. Commercial real estate holdings, investment portfolios, private equity shares. And at the bottom of the summary page, total estate value, $52,417,830. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it felt unreal. My father had always lived comfortably, but he never acted wealthy. He drove the same Lexus for 12 years, wore the same watch. I knew he owned some rental properties. I had no idea he was worth that much. Attorney Clark watched my reaction closely. "Did your father ever discuss his finances with you?" I shook my head. "No, never." He leaned back slightly. That aligns with what we expected. Expected? That word stuck in my mind. What does that mean? I asked quietly. He paused, choosing his words carefully. It means your father anticipated complications. Complications. My chest tightened. You mean Denise, I said. He didn't confirm it, but he didn't deny it either. Instead, he turned to another document. The will be formally read next week, he said. All primary parties must be present. Primary parties. That meant Denise. My stomach twisted. I hadn't seen her since she shut the door on Christmas, and the idea of sitting across from her again made my skin feel cold. But what he said next made my pulse spike. There's one more thing, he added quietly. He slid a smaller envelope toward me. It had my name written on it in my father's handwriting. Marissa. Just that. Nothing else. My hands trembled as I touched it. When did he write this? I whispered. Attorney Clark's eyes held mine. 3 weeks before he passed. He insisted it be delivered only after his death. A chill ran down my spine, because suddenly, that last message from my father echoed in my head again. I need to talk to you about something important. Denise doesn't know. I didn't open the envelope right away. I couldn't, because something deep inside me already understood this wasn't just a letter. It was a warning, or a weapon, or both. As I left the office, snow had started falling again. Soft, quiet, almost peaceful. But my mind was racing. Denise thought she had won. She had pushed me out, controlled access to my father, positioned herself as the grieving widow. And she was probably already planning how to manage the estate. But one question kept circling in my mind. If my father had anticipated complications, what exactly had he done to protect me? That night, after Lily went to bed, I finally sat at the kitchen table and opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a key, a small silver key. No label, no explanation, just a handwritten sentence at the bottom of the letter. Trust no one, especially her. The truth is, in box 314. I stared at that line for a long time, because I knew exactly what it meant. It meant my father hadn't just left money behind. He had left secrets, and Denise had no idea they existed. 3 days after I found the silver key, at exactly 9:27 a.m. on a Monday morning, I stood in front of a safety deposit vault at Dayton Federal Credit Union, holding a document that listed one name and one number, Richard Holt, Box 314. The annual fee printed at the bottom read $85, paid in full for the next 10 years. My father had renewed it 6 months before he died, which meant one thing. Whatever was inside that box, he expected it to matter long after he was gone. The bank employee, a quiet woman named Carla Nguyen, verified my ID twice before escorting me into the vault room. The air inside was cool and sterile. Metal doors lined the walls like silent witnesses. She slid open the narrow drawer labeled 314 and placed it in front of me. "Take your time," she said gently. "I'll be right outside." When she left, the room became so quiet I could hear my own breathing. For a moment, I just stared at the box, because opening it felt like crossing a line. Like once I knew what my father had hidden, there would be no going back to normal life. But normal life had ended on Christmas morning anyway, so I opened it. Inside were 3 items: a thick envelope, a small USB drive, and a folded legal document stamped with a notary seal. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up the document first. It was a trust amendment, dated 6 months before my father's death. I scanned the text, my heart pounding harder with each line. The Holt Family Revocable Trust had been modified. Beneficiary allocations had changed. And then I saw the key sentence: primary beneficiary, Marissa Ann Holt, 100% controlling interest. Denise Carter Holt, designated as temporary estate manager only until probate completion. I blinked, then read it again, because what it meant was unmistakable. Denise did not inherit the estate. She wasn't even a co-owner. She was just a temporary administrator, a caretaker, nothing more. The number $52, 417, 830 flashed in my mind again. My father had left everything to me. Not her, not shared. Everything. My chest tightened. Not from excitement, from understanding. He hadn't trusted her. Not at all. And that realization hurt in a way I hadn't expected. Because it meant, during his final months, he must have been watching Denise closely. Watching her behavior, her control, her isolation tactics. And he had made a quiet decision to protect me, to protect what he built, to protect Lily's future. I swallowed hard and reached for the envelope next. Inside were printed email copies, dozens of them, between Denise and someone named Victor Leland. The subject lines alone made my stomach drop. Transfer timing, medical authorization update, property liquidation strategy. I began reading, and within minutes, the room felt colder because the emails revealed something far worse than greed. They showed planning, intentional, calculated planning. Victor Leland, according to the signatures, was a financial consultant, but the tone of their conversations wasn't professional. It was conspiratorial. One email from Denise read, "If Richard's condition declines faster than expected, we need to ensure Marissa remains uninvolved. She cannot interfere with asset restructuring." Another message from Victor, "Once control is secured, we can move the Dayton commercial properties into the Shell Trust. Timing is critical before will disclosure." My pulse thundered in my ears. Shell Trust, asset restructuring, control secured. They weren't just expecting my father to die. They were preparing to move his assets before anyone else could stop them. My fingers tightened around the paper because suddenly, Christmas morning made perfect sense. Denise hadn't thrown me out because I was stressful. She threw me out because I was a legal obstacle. If I stayed close to my father, I could have discovered everything. And then I saw the date on the earliest email, 11 months before his death. This had been planned for nearly a year. Have you ever realized someone wasn't just cruel in the moment? They were quietly preparing to betray you long before you saw it. Because that realization doesn't feel like anger. It feels like ice sliding under your skin. I forced myself to breathe and reached for the last item, the USB drive. I hesitated, then walked to the small computer terminal in the vault room and plugged it in. One video file appeared, labeled simply, "For Marissa." My throat tightened. I clicked play. The screen flickered, and suddenly my father appeared. He looked thinner than I remembered, pale, tired, but his eyes were clear, focused. He leaned slightly forward toward the camera. "Marissa," he said quietly, "if you're watching this, it means Denise has already tried to isolate you." My chest constricted. He knew. He had known. "I need you to listen carefully," he continued. "There are things I discovered about Denise's financial activities that concern me deeply." He paused, breathing slowly. "She has been working with a consultant named Victor Leland to move assets without my authorization." My hands clenched into fists because hearing him confirm it made the betrayal feel heavier. "Real. I have documented everything he said, but you must not confront her directly until the will is read. Doing so could allow her to accelerate transfers." My father's gaze hardened slightly. "Denise believes she will inherit everything. She doesn't know the trust was amended." He leaned closer. "And Marissa, if she realizes you know the truth before probate, she may attempt to destroy evidence." A chill ran down my spine because suddenly, every memory of Denise's calm, controlled behavior felt different, more dangerous, more calculated. The video ended with his final words, "Stay patient, stay quiet, and remember, the strongest revenge is never loud." The screen went black. I sat frozen in the chair because now everything was clear. Denise thought she had won. She believed she controlled a $52 million estate. She believed I was powerless. What she didn't know was that my father had left behind evidence of her attempted fraud. And legally, everything already belonged to me. But there was one problem, one detail that made my stomach twist with unease. Because at the bottom of one email, I had noticed a recent date, only 2 weeks ago, after my father had already died, which meant Denise and Victor were still moving assets, still executing their plan, still unaware that I was about to walk into the will reading, with the power to destroy everything they thought they owned. Tiep Chuang 4, Chapter 4. 9 days after I opened Box 314, at exactly 10:00 a.m. on a gray Wednesday morning, I walked into the probate conference room, where Denise was already seated at the head of the table wearing black silk and a diamond necklace worth at least $18,000. She looked like a widow in a luxury magazine, composed, elegant, untouchable, and when she saw me, her lips curved into the faintest smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh," she said smoothly, "I wasn't sure you'd come." Her voice held that same controlled warmth she used when she threw me out on Christmas, like we were discussing dinner reservations, not my father's estate. I didn't respond. I simply took the seat across from her. Attorney Benjamin Clark sat between us, reviewing documents. 2 witnesses from the probate office stood quietly near the wall. Denise crossed her legs and folded her hands over a leather folder. She radiated confidence, and I knew why. She believed she already controlled everything. She leaned slightly toward me and spoke in a low voice meant only for my ears. "You know, Marissa, it would have been easier for everyone if you hadn't complicated Richard's final months." I held her gaze without blinking. "I didn't complicate anything I said quietly. You just didn't like that he loved me." For a split second, something flickered across her face. Not guilt, not regret, annoyance. Then it vanished behind her polished expression. Attorney Clark cleared his throat. "Thank you for attending," he said formally. "We'll begin with the reading of Mr. Richard Holt's last will and testament." Denise sat up slightly straighter, like someone preparing to receive confirmation of a victory she had already mentally celebrated. And as the lawyer began reading, I watched her carefully, because what happened next was not an explosion. It was something much colder, a slow fracture. The will began with standard language: medical directives, funeral instructions, personal belongings. Denise remained calm, almost bored, but then Clark turned to the estate distribution section. The remainder of the Holt family revocable trust, including all financial accounts, commercial properties, and investment portfolios, shall be transferred as follows. Denise leaned forward slightly. Her diamond bracelet clinked softly against the table. Attorney Clark continued in an even voice. "To my daughter, Marissa Ann Holt, who shall receive 100% controlling interest of all trust assets." Silence hit the room like a physical force. Denise didn't react immediately. She simply blinked once, like she had misheard. Then she let out a short, incredulous laugh. "I'm sorry," she said lightly. "I think there's been a mistake." Attorney Clark didn't look up. "There is no mistake." Her smile tightened. "I'm Richard's wife, his legal spouse of 12 years. The primary beneficiary should be." She stopped mid-sentence as Clark slid a document across the table toward her. "The trust amendment was executed and notarized 6 months ago," he said calmly. Denise stared at the paper. Her eyes moved rapidly across the lines, and for the first time since I had known her, her composure cracked. Not dramatically, not loudly, just a subtle tightening of her jaw. Her breathing became shallower. "That's impossible," she said quietly. "It is fully valid," Clark replied. Denise's gaze snapped toward me, and in that instant, her eyes were no longer warm or polished. They were sharp, calculating, dangerous. "You knew about this," she said. It wasn't a question. I met her stare evenly. "I knew Dad loved me," I replied. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. She leaned back slowly in her chair. Her fingers tapped once against the table. Then she spoke in a measured tone. "Well," she said, forcing a small smile, "even if that's true, I'm still the estate administrator." Her voice regained its confidence. "Which means I've been managing all financial decisions for the past month. There it was, her fallback position. Control, authority, strategy. Attorney Clark nodded slightly. Yes, you were designated temporary administrator, pending probate. Denise's smile widened. Then I assume my actions during that time remain legally protected. Clark paused, and for the first time, there was a hint of steel in his voice. That depends on whether those actions complied with fiduciary law. The word fiduciary landed like a warning shot. Denise's expression stiffened. What exactly are you implying? She asked coldly. Clark folded his hands. I'm not implying anything, but all estate transfers during this period will be subject to audit. Audit. That single word made Denise go very still. Because audits meant documentation, records, proof, and suddenly the confidence she had walked in with began to thin at the edges. Have you ever watched someone realize slowly that the ground beneath them isn't solid anymore? It doesn't look like panic. It looks like calculation. Like they're trying to figure out how much damage they can still control. Denise turned toward me again. Her voice was softer now, more deliberate. Marissa, she said we should discuss this privately. There's no reason to turn this into conflict. It was the first time she had suggested cooperation, which told me everything. She was afraid, but I remembered my father's words from the video. Stay patient, stay quiet. So I simply said, we can talk after the audit. Her eyes narrowed, just slightly, because she understood what that meant. It meant I wasn't naive. It meant I wasn't intimidated. It meant I knew something she didn't. Attorney Clark closed the file. This concludes the will reading. Formal asset transfer proceedings will begin within 30 days. 30 days. That timeline hung in the air like a countdown. As we stood, Denise leaned close enough for only me to hear her next words. You think this is over? She whispered. Her voice was cold now, stripped of all pretense. You have no idea how complicated this estate really is. I didn't respond, because she was right about one thing. It wasn't over, not even close. Because what Denise didn't know was that I already had proof she had tried to move millions of dollars illegally. And an audit would expose everything. But there was one detail that kept echoing in my mind as I left the building. One line from those emails. A transfer scheduled for February 28th, just 8 days away, which meant Denise wasn't done yet. She was still planning something big enough to risk everything before she lost control completely. 4 days after the will reading, at exactly 7:46 p.m. on a bitterly cold Sunday night, someone tried to access my salon's business account and initiated a $183,000 wire transfer to an offshore holding company in Delaware. The bank flagged it as suspicious because I had never moved more than $12,000 at a time in my entire life. I only knew it happened because my phone rang while I was closing up the shop. Miss Holt, the fraud officer, said, "Did you authorize a transfer to Leland Financial Group, LLC?" The name hit me like a sudden drop in temperature. Leland. Victor Leland, the same man from Denise's emails. My voice stayed steady. No, I said. I did not. The officer paused. We've frozen the transaction, but whoever submitted it had full account credentials. Full credentials, not guessed, not hacked randomly. Someone who knew my banking information. My pulse slowed into something cold and focused because I realized immediately what this meant. Denise wasn't just trying to control my father's estate anymore. She was trying to drain my personal finances, too. I thanked the bank confirmed account lockdown procedures and hung up. Then I stood alone in the silent salon, staring at my reflection in the mirror. And something inside me shifted. Up until that moment, I had been reacting. Defensive, cautious, patient like my father advised. But this was escalation. And it told me something important. Denise was running out of time. Because people who feel secure don't take reckless risks. People who are losing control do. Have you ever noticed how dangerous someone becomes when they realize they're about to lose everything? They don't back down. They panic. They strike. That night, after Lily fell asleep, I opened my laptop and began organizing everything I had. the trust documents, the emails from Box 314, screenshots of the attempted bank transfer. I created 3 separate folders: evidence, timeline, legal. Because my father hadn't just left me money, he had left me a battlefield, and I intended to be prepared. At 10:15 p.m., my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't the bank. It was Denise. Her name flashed on the screen for the first time since Christmas. I let it ring 3 times before answering. "Hello," I said calmly. Her voice was smooth, controlled, but underneath, I could hear tension. "Marissa," she said, "we need to talk." There was no fake warmth now, no polite pretending, just urgency. "I'm listening," I replied. She exhaled slowly. "There have been complications with some of Richard's financial arrangements," she said carefully. "And it would benefit both of us to resolve them privately." Privately. That word told me everything. She didn't want auditors involved. She didn't want attorneys. She wanted control. "What kind of complications?" I asked. There was a brief pause. Then she said Richard made certain last-minute changes that were not fully disclosed to his financial advisors. Her wording was precise, but what she meant was clear. She had discovered the trust amendment, and she was scrambling. I leaned back in my chair. "And what exactly do you want from me?" I asked quietly. Her tone softened slightly. "A cooperative agreement," she said. "If you sign over administrative authority temporarily, we can stabilize the estate and avoid unnecessary legal conflict." There it was, her strategy. Not begging, not threatening, negotiating, because she still believed she could outmaneuver me. I let silence stretch between us for several seconds. Then I said, "You tried to wire money out of my personal account tonight." She froze. I could hear it in her breathing. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she said quickly. The denial came too fast, too sharp, which meant she knew exactly what I meant. "Leland Financial Group," I continued calmly. "Sound familiar?" Silence. Then her voice returned colder. "You shouldn't make accusations without proof," she said. "Proof?" The word echoed in my mind, because she didn't know how much proof I already had. And for the first time, I decided to push back just a little. Not revealing everything, just enough to shift the balance. My father documented everything I said quietly. Another pause. Longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice was tight. "What exactly did he tell you?" I looked at the ceiling for a moment, and then I delivered the first line that would later go viral in thousands of YouTube comments. "You made one mistake, Denise." I let the silence hang before finishing. "You thought he was dying before he was watching." She didn't respond, because she understood the meaning instantly. He had seen her. He had recorded her. He had prepared. And now she realized she wasn't negotiating from strength anymore. She was exposed. But Denise Carter Holt was not the type of woman who collapsed easily. Instead, her voice turned eerily calm. "Marissa," she said, "you're underestimating how complicated this situation is." Her words came slowly, deliberately. "There are legal mechanisms in motion that you don't fully understand." My stomach tightened slightly, because that sounded less like a bluff and more like a warning. "What mechanisms?" I asked. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she said something that made my skin go cold. "You should check the February 28th transfer schedule." The line went silent after that. She had hung up. I sat there staring at my phone, because I remembered exactly what date that was. The same one mentioned in the emails from Box 314, February 28th, 8 days from now. And if Denise sounded that confident, it meant she believed something irreversible was about to happen on that day. Something she thought even I couldn't stop, which left one terrifying question echoing in my mind as I opened the estate transfer calendar on my laptop. What exactly was scheduled to move on February 28th? And why did Denise sound so sure it would still go through? 2 days after Denise's warning call at exactly 11:18 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, I sat across from attorney Benjamin Clark again as he slid a single document toward me and said quietly, "If this executes on February 28th, you could lose nearly $31 million in assets before probate closes. The number hit like a physical impact. 31 million, more than half the estate. And according to the document in front of me, the transfer wasn't illegal on its surface. It was worse than that. It was technically structured to look legitimate. The paperwork outlined a pre-existing liquidity reallocation agreement signed 8 months before my father's death. It authorized the temporary movement of multiple commercial properties into a holding trust called Meridian Asset Stabilization Fund. The fund's registered manager, Victor Leland. My throat tightened because this wasn't a simple bank transfer. It was a layered financial maneuver, complex, strategic, and designed to survive legal scrutiny. "Explain this to me," I said quietly. Clark leaned forward. "Your father authorized a contingency restructuring plan last year," he said, "but there's a key detail." He tapped the page. It required dual authorization, both his and the estate beneficiary. My pulse quickened. "That means," I whispered, "it cannot legally execute without your approval," he confirmed. Relief surged through me for half a second. Then he continued. "However, Denise's temporary administrator has been attempting to certify herself as acting beneficiary under a spousal emergency clause." My stomach dropped. Emergency clause. Of course. She had been preparing this for months. "That clause allows temporary spousal authority," Clark explained, "but only if the spouse can prove the primary beneficiary is unreachable or legally incapacitated." My hands clenched into fists. That was why she had isolated me, why she threw me out, why she blocked communication. She wasn't just being cruel. She was trying to create legal grounds to claim I was absent. "Has she filed that claim?" I asked. Clark nodded slowly. 2 weeks ago." Cold spread through my chest. "Does she have a chance of succeeding?" I asked. He hesitated. "If uncontested, yes." The room felt smaller suddenly, because I understood exactly what that meant. If I hadn't opened box 314, if I hadn't stepped forward at the will reading, if I had stayed silent, she could have legally moved half the estate before I even realized it. And once those assets entered Meridian Fund, recovering them would take years of litigation, possibly longer. "Why February 28th, I asked. Clark exhaled slowly. "Because that's the last day before probate oversight locks all estate movement. A deadline. A final window." Denise wasn't bluffing. She was racing the clock. Have you ever realized someone wasn't just planning betrayal? They were planning it down to the exact calendar date. Because that kind of precision doesn't come from emotion. It comes from calculation. I leaned back in my chair, forcing myself to think clearly. "What stops her?" I asked. Clark's eyes met mine. "You do." Silence hung between us. Then he added, "If you formally contest her emergency claim and submit evidence of intent to defraud the court, can freeze all transfers immediately." My heart pounded. Evidence of intent to defraud. That meant revealing the emails, the video, everything my father had left. But my father's warning echoed in my mind again. Stay patient, stay quiet. Because once Denise knew I had everything, she might attempt something desperate, something unpredictable. "What happens if we freeze it now?" I asked. Clark considered. "She'll deny everything he said, claim misunderstanding, blame advisors, possibly portray herself as a grieving widow being attacked." I could already picture it. The tears, the victim act, the manipulation. He continued, "And if the freeze happens before February 28th, she'll know you're the one who stopped it." I understood the implication immediately. It would end the element of surprise. And Denise Carter Holt was far more dangerous when she knew exactly who she was fighting. I stared at the document in front of me. $31 million, one legal deadline, and a woman who had already shown she was willing to cross lines most people wouldn't imagine. "What would you advise?" I asked quietly. Clark didn't answer right away. Then he said something that made my spine straighten. "I would advise patience," the same word my father used. Because he continued, "There is another option." I looked up sharply. "What option?" He slid a second folder toward me. "This," he said, "is a record of scheduled estate disclosures." I opened it. Inside was an event listing. Holt Foundation Annual Charity Gala, February 28th, 7:00 p.m. Attendance expected over 300 guests. Board members, investors, community leaders. And Denise Carter Holt was scheduled to deliver the keynote speech. My pulse quickened, because suddenly I understood. The transfer was scheduled for earlier that same day, which meant Denise planned to walk into that gala believing she had already secured $31 million in assets, believing she had won. Clark's voice dropped slightly. If evidence of fraudulent intent were presented publicly that evening, he said carefully, it would not only stop the transfer. He paused. It would destroy her credibility permanently. The weight of his words settled heavily in my chest. Because this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about truth, exposure, justice, and timing. Perfect timing. I closed the folder slowly, my hands no longer trembling, my voice steady. "Then we wait," I said. Clark nodded once. "Yes," he said quietly, "we wait." That night, as I watched Lily sleeping peacefully in her small bed above the salon, I realized something important. Denise thought February 28th would be her victory, her final move, her secured future. She had no idea that it was about to become the night everything collapsed, because she still didn't know one critical detail. The video my father recorded wasn't the only recording he had left behind. 5 nights before February 28th, at exactly 2:41 a.m., I woke up to the sound of someone trying to open the back door of my salon with a key. Not knocking, not forcing it, trying to unlock it, quietly, methodically. For a split second, I lay frozen in bed, my mind refusing to process what I was hearing. Then the metal handle rattled again, slow, deliberate. My pulse dropped into a strange, calm rhythm. Not panic, not fear, just cold awareness, because I knew immediately who it had to be. Denise Carter Holt didn't break doors. She used keys. I slid out of bed without making a sound and moved toward the small hallway window overlooking the alley behind the salon. The security light flickered on, and I saw a dark SUV parked with its engine running. Next to the back entrance stood a man in a gray coat, holding something metallic in his hand. Not a crowbar, a key ring. He tried the lock again. My breath slowed, because now I understood. They weren't here to rob the salon. They were here for something specific, something inside, something they believed I didn't know existed. The box, the documents, the evidence. Have you ever realized someone is so afraid of the truth coming out? They're willing to break into your life at 2 a.m. to erase it, because that's not greed anymore. That's desperation. I quietly reached for my phone and pressed the emergency call button without taking my eyes off the window. The dispatcher answered in a whispering voice. 911, what is your emergency? Someone is attempting to enter my business, I said calmly. I believe they have a key. Within seconds, the man at the door stopped moving. He glanced toward the alley entrance. Then he turned and hurried back into the SUV. The vehicle pulled away before the first police siren could be heard. Gone, like it had never been there, but it left something behind. A realization that settled heavily in my chest as I stood there in the dim light. Denise knew. Not everything, but enough. Enough to be afraid. When the police arrived 10 minutes later, they inspected the lock. One officer, a tall woman named Sergeant Emily Brooks, crouched beside the door and examined the scratches around the keyhole. This wasn't forced, she said. Whoever tried this had a working key copy. A copy, which meant Denise had probably duplicated keys long ago, back when she still had legal access to my father's records, access to everything connected to me. You have security cameras? She asked. Yes, I replied. We reviewed the footage together inside the salon. The timestamp showed exactly what I had seen. 2:39 a.m. SUV enters alley. 2:40 a.m. man approaches door. 2:41 a.m. attempts entry. But when the camera angle captured his face briefly as he turned, my stomach dropped because I recognized him instantly. Victor Leland, the same man from the emails, the financial consultant, the one orchestrating asset transfers, standing outside my salon at 2 a.m. with a key. Sergeant Brooks looked at me carefully. "You know him?" "Yes," I said quietly. Her expression hardened. "Then you should consider filing a formal trespassing and attempted unlawful entry report." I nodded slowly, because this wasn't just intimidation. It was evidence. Evidence of intent. Evidence of fear. Evidence of how far they were willing to go. After the officers left, I sat alone in the salon chair, staring at the dark screen of the security monitor. The silence felt heavier than before, because something inside me had shifted again. Not toward anger, toward certainty. Denise wasn't just playing financial games anymore. She was losing control. And when people like her lose control, they become reckless. At 6:15 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Just one sentence. "Stop interfering," and this ends quietly. No signature, no explanation. But I didn't need one. I stared at the message for a long time. Then, I typed back exactly 6 words. "I don't negotiate with stolen futures." I didn't expect a response, and none came, because silence can be louder than threats. That afternoon, I met with Attorney Clark again and handed him a copy of the security footage. He watched it twice. Then he leaned back slowly. "This," he said, quietly, "changes everything." How, I asked. He folded his hands. "Because attempted unlawful entry, tied to an active financial dispute, strengthens a fraud conspiracy case." Fraud conspiracy. The words felt heavy. Legal. Irreversible. But he added carefully, "It also means Denise may escalate further before February 28th. I nodded. I already knew that, because someone who sends threats at dawn doesn't stop easily. They double down. I thought about Lily upstairs at the salon, about her small shoes by the door, her drawings taped to the wall, and something inside me hardened into something unshakable. That night, as I tucked her into bed, she asked quietly, "Mommy, why are you locking the doors twice now?" I smoothed her hair gently, because sometimes, I said softly, grown-ups make bad choices when they're scared. She frowned sleepily. "Are you scared?" I paused. Then I answered honestly. "No," I said. "I'm careful." Because fear makes you reactive, but careful makes you powerful. After she fell asleep, I sat alone at the kitchen table and opened the final folder my father had left in box 314, the one I hadn't fully examined yet. Inside was a list, names, account numbers, transaction records, and at the very bottom, a single handwritten note from my father. "Don't confront her alone. Someone else already knows the truth." My heart skipped, because until that moment, I had believed I was the only one holding the full picture. But now, I realized something unexpected. There was another witness, someone who had seen what Denise and Victor were doing, someone my father trusted enough to write down. And next to that note was one final name, a name that made my breath catch when I read it. Because it wasn't a lawyer, it wasn't a banker, it wasn't anyone from the estate, it was someone much closer, someone Denise would never suspect. The name read, Elaine Carter. 3 mornings after the break-in, attempt at exactly 8:05 a.m., I sat inside a quiet cafe 2 blocks from the probate courthouse, holding a printed sheet of paper with one name circled in blue ink, Elaine Carter, Denise's older sister. Not cousin, not distant relative, her sister, the woman Denise had cut off from her life over a decade ago. At least that was the story Denise always told. Elaine was unstable, she used to say, with a dismissive wave. "We don't speak anymore." But my father had written her name in his own hand, which meant one thing. Elaine Carter knew something Denise desperately wanted hidden. I had called the number listed in the folder the night before. She answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice was cautious, but calm. "I've been wondering when you'd contact me," she said. No surprise, no confusion, just quiet certainty, which told me She had been expecting this moment for a long time. Now sitting across from her in the cafe, I finally understood why. Elaine Carter was in her early 60s, with short silver hair and eyes that looked tired but sharp, the kind of eyes that belonged to someone who had watched too many truths unfold. She didn't waste time on small talk. Instead, she slid a thick manila envelope across the table toward me. "Your father asked me to hold this," she said quietly, "in case something happened before he could stop Denise himself." My fingers tightened slightly as I touched the envelope. "How long have you had this?" I asked. "Almost a year," she replied. A year, which meant my father's suspicions hadn't been recent. They had been building slowly, carefully, strategically. Have you ever realized someone you trusted had been quietly preparing a safety net long before you even knew you were falling? Because that realization doesn't feel dramatic. It feels steady, like someone had been standing behind you the entire time unseen. I opened the envelope slowly. Inside were printed bank records, transfer authorizations, corporate registration filings, and one document that made my breath catch: Meridian Asset Stabilization Fund. Ownership structure. Listed under controlling beneficiaries: Victor Leland, 40%. Denise Carter Holt, 60%. My pulse slowed into something cold and precise, because this confirmed what the emails had only hinted at. The fund wasn't neutral. It wasn't protective. It was theirs. A private shell designed to absorb my father's assets under the appearance of legitimate restructuring. They created it 9 months ago, Elaine said quietly, watching my face. After Denise convinced your father to give her temporary financial oversight during his treatment. My jaw tightened. She told him it was to reduce stress, Elaine continued. But once she had access, she began moving small amounts quietly. "How do you know all this?" I asked. Elaine held my gaze. "Because she tried to recruit me." The words hung in the air between us. I blinked. "What do you mean?" Elaine leaned back slightly. "Denise needed a second trustee's signature to make some transfers look legitimate," she said. "She approached me last spring. My stomach twisted, and you refused." She nodded once. "That's when she cut contact completely. She knew I wouldn't help her." A chill moved down my spine. Because this wasn't just financial manipulation. This was a calculated, long-term scheme. Denise hadn't planned to inherit my father's estate. She had planned to quietly extract it over time, and my father had realized it. Too late to confront her safely, but not too late to prepare. Elaine reached into her purse and pulled out a small flash drive. "This," she said, placing it in front of me, "is the real reason she's afraid." My pulse quickened. "What's on it?" I asked. She exhaled slowly. "Audio recordings." My breath caught. "Of what?" "Meetings between Denise and Victor," she said. Silence settled between us. Because that wasn't just evidence. That was direct proof of intent. Criminal intent. Your father installed a recording system in his home office after he started suspecting her, Elaine explained. He asked me to keep backup copies in case anything happened. I stared at the flash drive. Small, ordinary, but heavy with consequences. "Why didn't you go to authorities?" I asked. Elaine's expression softened slightly. "Because your father didn't want a scandal while he was alive," she said quietly. "He wanted you protected first." Protected, not avenged, not vindicated. Protected. The difference mattered. She leaned forward slightly. "Maria-Rissa," she said, gently, "Denise doesn't just want money. She wants control, reputation, power." Her voice lowered. "And if she realizes you have recordings, she will panic." I already knew that, because the break-in had proven it. But hearing it confirmed by someone who knew Denise intimately made the truth heavier. More real. "What would you do?" I asked quietly. Elaine held my gaze steadily. "I would wait," she said. The same word again. "Wait. Wait until she believes she's won." Elaine continued. "Because people reveal their worst truths when they think they're untouchable." Her eyes hardened slightly. "And February 28th, she will believe exactly that." I nodded slowly, because now The picture was complete. Denise planned to finalize the asset transfer that afternoon, then walk onto the gala stage that evening as a respected widow and philanthropic leader. She believed that once the money moved, nothing could stop her. But she didn't know about the recordings. She didn't know about Elaine. And she didn't know how carefully my father had prepared for this moment. As we stood to leave, Elaine touched my arm gently. "Your father loved you deeply," she said. My throat tightened. "I know," I whispered. She hesitated, then added quietly, "And there's one more recording you haven't heard yet." My heart skipped. "What do you mean?" Her expression turned solemn. "It's dated 3 days before he died," she said. "And it isn't a conversation." She paused. "It's a confession." A chill moved through my chest, because suddenly I understood something I hadn't considered before. Denise hadn't just been planning fraud. She might have done something far worse. And whatever my father had recorded in that final confession was powerful enough that he had hidden it separately. Hidden it from everyone, even me, until now. 2 nights before February 28th, at exactly 11:36 p.m., I sat alone in my dark salon office with headphones on, listening to a recording my father made 3 days before he died. A recording that lasted 6 minutes and ended with a sentence that changed everything. "I believe Denise is trying to accelerate my death." The words didn't sound dramatic. They didn't sound panicked. They sounded exhausted, certain, final. For several seconds after I heard them, I couldn't move. My hands were frozen around the edge of the desk, because that wasn't fraud anymore. That wasn't betrayal. That was something far darker, something criminal. Have you ever heard the voice of someone you love calmly describing their own danger, knowing they don't have enough time to stop it themselves? It doesn't feel like shock. It feels like the air has been pulled out of the room. I forced myself to replay the recording from the beginning. My father's voice was weaker than in the earlier video, but still steady. "I am documenting this for legal protection," he said. "If anything happens to me sooner than expected, this should be investigated." A pause, then the sound of him taking a slow breath. "Over the past month, Denise has been controlling all medication scheduling," he continued. "Twice, I experienced severe drops in blood pressure after she administered evening doses." My chest tightened painfully because I remembered those last weeks, how Denise had insisted he was too tired for visits, too fragile for stress, and I had believed her. "I requested independent review of my prescriptions," he said. Denise became angry and said I was paranoid. Another pause. Then his voice dropped lower. "Yesterday, I overheard her on the phone with Victor Leland, discussing timelines. She said, quote, 'Once this phase ends, the transfer can proceed immediately.'" My fingers dug into the desk because the meaning was unmistakable. She hadn't just been waiting for him to die. She had been planning around it, calculating it, timing it. My father continued. "I cannot prove direct intent," he said quietly, "but I feel unsafe under her care." That sentence broke something inside me, because my father was not a dramatic man. He was careful with words, precise, and for him to say he felt unsafe, it meant he truly believed his life was at risk. He continued speaking, his voice growing softer. "If you are hearing this, Marissa, I want you to know one thing above all else." A long pause followed. Then he said, "Do not let anger guide you. Let truth do the work." Tears finally blurred my vision at that point, because even in fear, even in betrayal, he was still thinking about protecting me from becoming consumed by it. The recording ended with one final sentence. Calm, steady, devastating. Denise believes she's smarter than consequences. Silence filled the room. I removed the headphones slowly, because now everything was clear in a way it hadn't been before. Denise hadn't just tried to steal an estate. She had manipulated medical care, accelerated isolation, discussed timelines around his death. Legally proving murder would be complex, but legally proving intent to harm, intent to defraud, intent to manipulate medical authority, that was possible. And combined with financial conspiracy, it would destroy her completely, irreversibly. My phone buzzed suddenly on the desk. A calendar alert. Holt Foundation, Annual Charity Gala, tomorrow, 7:00 p.m. I stared at the notification because now I understood the full weight of what was about to happen. Tomorrow afternoon, Denise planned to execute the $31 million transfer. Tomorrow evening, she planned to stand on a stage in front of 300 people and speak about legacy, charity, and family. She believed she would be untouchable, respected, admired. She had no idea that by tomorrow night, everything she built would collapse in public. That was when my phone buzzed again. A text from Attorney Clark. The transfer authorization window opens at 3:00 p.m. tomorrow. Are you ready? I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back 4 words. Yes, let her proceed, because stopping her early would only expose the attempt. Letting her go forward, letting her believe she had succeeded. That would expose everything, and truth, once revealed publicly, could never be buried again. A few minutes later, another message appeared. This one from Elaine. I've secured the forensic authentication for the recordings. They're legally admissible. Admissible, that word carried enormous weight because it meant this wasn't just emotional evidence. It was court-valid proof, enough to trigger criminal investigation, enough to freeze assets permanently, enough to end Denise Carter Holt's carefully constructed world. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the dark ceiling. And for the first time since Christmas morning, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel fear. I felt something quieter, something steady, certainty, because the battle was no longer about survival. It was about timing, precision, truth. Before going upstairs to check on Lily, I looked at the framed photo of my father on the office shelf. He was smiling in the picture, relaxed, peaceful. I whispered softly into the silence, I'm ready, Dad. But as I turned off the lights and locked the office door, one final realization settled heavily in my mind. Because there was still one unknown factor, one detail I couldn't predict. Denise didn't know about the recordings. She didn't know about Elaine, but she did know something else. She knew tomorrow was her last chance. And people who believe they are about to lose everything sometimes make one final desperate move that no one sees coming. On February 28th, at exactly 3:02 p.m., Denise Carter Holt authorized a $31,000,000 asset transfer, smiling, as she signed the final digital confirmation, completely unaware that every keystroke she made was being recorded by a court-appointed forensic auditor. I know this because I was sitting in Attorney Clark's office watching it happen live. He had secured an emergency oversight order that morning, quietly, legally, precisely timed, not to stop her, but to document everything. Because once Denise believed the transfer had gone through successfully, she would no longer be careful. She would celebrate. She would talk. She would reveal the truth herself. And that was exactly what we needed. Have you ever noticed how people hide their worst behavior when they're afraid, but show it proudly when they think they've already won? At 3:14 p.m., the confirmation notice appeared on the monitoring screen. Transfer completed Meridian Asset Stabilization Fund. Clark leaned back slowly. It's done, he said quietly. I nodded once, my hands resting calmly in my lap. No shaking, no adrenaline, just stillness. Because the most dangerous moment in a battle isn't when someone attacks you. It's when they think the fight is over. At 5:30 p.m., I drove home, changed into a simple navy dress, and tied my hair back neatly. Not glamorous, not dramatic, just controlled. As I fastened a small silver necklace, the one my father gave me when I opened my salon, I caught my reflection in the mirror, and I remembered something he used to say. Power isn't loud, it's precise. Tonight would be precise. At 6:58 p.m., I stepped into the Holt Foundation Gala Ballroom at the Dayton Grand Hotel. The room glittered with chandeliers. crystal glasses, perfectly arranged white roses. More than 300 guests filled the space. Business leaders, charity board members, local politicians, people who respected my father, people who admired Denise. And right on schedule, at exactly 7:00 p.m., she walked onto the stage, wearing a black evening gown that probably cost more than my entire salon's yearly rent. She looked flawless, poised, confident, untouchable. The room fell silent as she approached the microphone. She smiled warmly, the same polished smile she had used for years. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began. Richard believed deeply in giving back to this community. Her voice flowed smoothly, practiced, emotional, at just the right moments. She spoke about legacy, about family, about honoring his memory. And I watched her carefully from the back of the room, because she truly believed she had succeeded. Her eyes moved confidently across the audience. She had no idea the auditors were already finalizing the asset freeze order. No idea the recordings were prepared for legal submission. No idea that every word she spoke tonight would soon be compared against documented truth. At 7:12 p.m., she said something that made the room applaud. "Richard trusted me completely," she declared, "and I will continue protecting everything he built." That was when Attorney Clark, standing beside me, leaned slightly toward me and whispered, "Now." I stepped forward calmly, each footstep steady, measured, not rushing, because this moment wasn't about emotion. It was about timing, perfect timing. As I approached the stage steps, several guests recognized me and murmured quietly. Denise saw the movement. Her eyes shifted toward me. For a split second, her smile faltered. Then she recovered instantly, because she still believed she was in control. "Marissa," she said into the microphone with a polite laugh, "I'm glad you could join us." The room turned toward me, hundreds of eyes watching, waiting. I stopped at the base of the stage and spoke clearly. "You shouldn't have said that." The room fell silent again. Denise's smile stiffened. "I'm sorry," she said lightly. I held her gaze steadily. "You said he trusted you completely," I repeated. My voice remained calm, cold, precise. "That's not what he recorded." The word recorded hit the air like a dropped glass. Denise's expression froze. Not dramatically, just still. And in that moment, something changed in her eyes. The confidence didn't vanish, but it cracked, because she understood instantly what I meant. The room buzzed with confused whispers. Denise laughed softly, trying to recover. "I think this is neither the time nor place." "That's where you're wrong," I said quietly. My voice cut through the room without rising. "This is exactly the time." Silence fell again, heavy, expectant. I stepped closer to the stage, and then I delivered the second line that would later be quoted in thousands of comments online. "You didn't lose tonight because I exposed you." I paused, letting every word settle. "You lost because you believed no one was watching." Denise's fingers tightened around the microphone, her breathing shallow now, the first signs of panic beneath her controlled exterior. Attorney Clark stepped forward beside me, and in his hand was a sealed legal folder, the one containing the forensic authentication of the recordings, the one that would trigger criminal investigation within hours, the one that Denise had no idea existed. As he held it up, Denise's eyes locked onto it. And for the first time since Christmas morning, I saw real fear, because she finally understood something she hadn't considered. This wasn't just a family dispute. It was evidence, legal, permanent, irreversible. But even then, she still didn't know the most devastating part. She didn't know what was actually on those recordings. And she didn't know that in less than 60 seconds. The entire room would hear the truth in my father's own voice. At exactly 7:18 p.m., in a ballroom filled with over 300 guests, I pressed a single button on a small remote, and my father's voice echoed through the speakers Denise herself had arranged for her speech. The room went completely silent. Not a polite silence, not a confused silence, a stunned, breath-held stillness. Because hearing the voice of a recently deceased man, calm, clear, unmistakable, cut through every layer of Denise's polished performance instantly. This recording is being made for legal protection, my father's voice said through the sound system. If anything happens to me sooner than expected, it should be investigated. Denise's hand jerked slightly on the microphone. Her eyes widened. For a fraction of a second, she looked like someone who had just stepped onto thin ice and heard it crack beneath her feet. The audience shifted uneasily. Some leaned forward. Others exchanged shocked glances because they understood immediately. This was not planned. This was not ceremonial. This was exposure. My father's voice continued. Over the past month, Denise has controlled all medication administration, he said steadily. I have experienced severe drops in blood pressure following doses she provided. A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. Denise's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Her face had gone pale, not dramatically, just drained. The perfect widow mask was slipping. My father's voice went on. I requested independent review of prescriptions. Denise reacted with anger and refused outside oversight. A woman near the front table gasped softly. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Denise finally found her voice. "This is ridiculous," she said sharply into the microphone. This recording is being taken completely out of context. But her voice wasn't steady anymore. It carried strain. And for the first time, it sounded defensive. My father's final words from the recording played next. Slow, clear, irreversible. I feel unsafe under her care. That sentence landed heavier than anything else. Because it wasn't an accusation. It was fear. And everyone in that room heard it. Denise shook her head quickly. This is absurd, she said louder now. He was confused near the end. His health was deteriorating. There it was, the first stage. Denial. Exactly as expected. Have you ever watched someone try to talk their way out of a truth that has already landed in everyone's mind? They don't sound convincing. They sound desperate. Attorney Clark stepped forward, calmly. Mrs. Holt, he said evenly, the recording has been forensically authenticated. It is admissible legal evidence. Denise's eyes snapped toward him. And what exactly are you accusing me of? She demanded. Her voice rose slightly. Not yet hysterical, but sharp, defensive, controlled anger replacing polished charm. Clark didn't raise his voice. We are presenting evidence of financial fraud conspiracy, he said, and intent to manipulate medical authority for personal gain. A collective murmur rolled through the audience. Denise laughed a brittle high sound. This is insane, she said quickly. Victor handled all financial matters. If there were irregularities, that was his responsibility. Stage 2, blame shifting. Exactly as predicted. She turned toward the audience. You all know me, she said, voice trembling now, but trying to sound sincere. I devoted 12 years to caring for Richard. Some guests looked uncertain. Some looked disturbed. No one applauded, because the recording had changed the emotional gravity of the room. And then Attorney Clark spoke one sentence that shattered her last defense. The Meridian Asset Stabilization Fund is 60% owned by you, Mrs. Holt. Silence crashed down again. Denise froze. Her lips parted slightly, but no denial came immediately this time. Because she knew that was verifiable, documented, proven. This evening, at 3:02 p.m., Clark continued calmly. You authorized a $31 million transfer into that fund. Gasps spread across the ballroom. Someone dropped a glass. It shattered loudly against the marble floor. Denise's composure collapsed in stages. First shock, then anger, then something darker. You don't understand, she said suddenly, her voice rising. I did everything for him. Everything. Stage 3, victim narrative. Her eyes filled with tears now. Real or forced, it didn't matter. The shift was unmistakable. I managed his stress, his finances, his health, she insisted. I sacrificed years of my life, while his daughter barely visited. Her gaze snapped toward me. blazing. "You don't get to judge me now," she said, voice shaking. "You weren't there at the end." I held her stare calmly, and then I spoke the third line that would later spread across thousands of viewers. "I wasn't there because you locked the door." Silence fell again, heavier than before, because everyone understood exactly what that meant. Denise's face crumpled, not gracefully, not theatrically, just collapsed. Her breathing became uneven. Her hands trembled visibly now. Because in that moment, she realized something final. There was no narrative left that could save her. The evidence was public. The witnesses were everywhere. Her reputation, the thing she valued most, was already gone. Security personnel, previously waiting discreetly at the edges of the room, stepped forward. Behind them, 2 uniformed financial crimes investigators entered the ballroom. Their presence made everything unmistakably real. Not rumor, not family conflict, legal consequences, permanent consequences. One investigator approached Denise calmly. "Mrs. Holt," he said, "we need you to come with us to answer questions regarding financial misconduct." Denise didn't resist. She didn't argue. She didn't scream. She simply stood there, eyes empty now. Because the final stage had arrived. Collapse. Complete. As they escorted her away, she glanced back at me once. Not with hatred. Not even with anger. Just with something hollow. The look of someone who finally understood. Control had never truly been hers. Truth had been waiting the entire time, and it had arrived exactly when it was meant to. But even as the ballroom remained stunned and quiet, there was one final step still waiting. Because exposure was only part of justice. The final piece, the one my father truly wanted, was something quieter. Something that would happen after the crowd left. After the cameras turned off. After the noise faded. A moment that wasn't about Denise at all. It was about closure. 2 weeks after the gala, at exactly 6:10 a.m., on a quiet Sunday morning, I stood alone beside my father's grave, holding a single white lily, while the early spring sun broke slowly across the cemetery. No reporters, no lawyers, no crowds, just stillness, and the soft sound of wind moving through bare tree branches. Denise Carter Holt had been formally charged 3 days earlier with multiple counts: financial fraud, conspiracy attempted, asset misappropriation, and obstruction of fiduciary oversight. Investigators were still reviewing the medical evidence, but even without those findings, the financial case alone carried potential sentences that would end any future she had imagined. Victor Leland had already accepted a plea agreement. He testified fully. He provided documents, and in exchange, his sentence would likely be reduced. The Meridian Fund had been frozen permanently. Every dollar returned to the estate. $31 million secured, $52 million protected. But standing there at my father's grave, none of those numbers mattered. Because this moment wasn't about money. It was about something quieter, something deeper. Closure. Have you ever reached the end of a long battle and realized you don't feel victorious? You just feel peaceful. That's what it felt like. Not triumph, not revenge, just the absence of fear. I knelt down and placed the lily gently against the headstone. "Everything's safe now," I whispered. My voice didn't break, because for the first time since Christmas morning, I didn't feel like I was holding something fragile inside me anymore. I felt steady, whole, like the storm had finally passed. A soft voice behind me said quietly, "He would be very proud of you." I turned to see Elaine Carter, standing a few steps away, hands folded, calmly in front of her. She had attended every legal hearing quietly, never seeking attention, never interfering, just present, like she had promised my father she would be. "Thank you," I said softly. She smiled gently. "You did exactly what he hoped you would," she said. "You let truth do the work." Those words settled warmly in my chest. Because they were true. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't fought loudly. I hadn't chased revenge. I had simply held on to evidence, waited, and let the truth unfold at the right moment. We stood in silence for a few minutes. Then Elaine said something unexpected. You know, she added, quietly, Denise asked about you during her arraignment. I blinked. What did she say? Elaine hesitated slightly, then answered. She said she never believed you would stay calm long enough to beat her. A faint, almost sad smile touched my lips, because that was Denise's final misunderstanding. She thought power meant control, manipulation, dominance. She never understood something simpler. Real power is patience. Real power is restraint. Real power is knowing you don't need to destroy someone, because the truth will do it for you. Later that afternoon, I returned to my salon. The neon open sign buzzed softly in the window. The scent of shampoo and hairspray filled the air. Familiar, grounding, normal. Lily sat in one of the styling chairs, swinging her legs, coloring quietly. She looked up and smiled. Did you talk to Grandpa today? She asked. I nodded. Yes, I said gently. What did you tell him? She asked. I walked over and kissed the top of her head. I told him we're okay now, I said. She smiled satisfied and went back to coloring. That simple moment, ordinary, peaceful, untouched by conflict, felt more valuable than anything else, because that was what my father had truly wanted. Not revenge, not drama, safety, stability, a future for Lily, a future where our lives weren't controlled by someone else's manipulation. A week later, the estate transfer finalized, officially. Every asset placed securely under the Holt family trust. I didn't buy a mansion. I didn't change my lifestyle dramatically. Instead, I did something much quieter. I expanded my salon, added 3 new chairs, hired 2 single mothers who needed stable work, and created a small scholarship fund in my father's name for vocational training in the community. Because legacy isn't what you own. It's what you protect and what you choose to build next. Sometimes customers still ask me about the case. They ask if I feel angry, if I hate Denise. I always give the same answer. No, I say calmly. I feel finished, because anger ties you to the past. But peace sets you free. On the first anniversary of my father's death, Lily and I visited the cemetery again at sunset. She placed a drawing beside the headstone, a simple picture of 3 stick figures holding hands, one tall, one medium, one small. Grandpa can still see us, she said confidently. I smiled. Yes, I said softly. I think he can. As we walked away, the sky glowed warm gold behind us. And for the first time since everything began, there were no open loops left, no unanswered questions. No shadows waiting, just quiet, just forward, just a future that belonged entirely to us. If you've ever had to choose between reacting emotionally or staying calm long enough for the truth to surface, tell me in the comments. Because sometimes the strongest revenge isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It's simply this: living peacefully after someone tried to take everything from you. And if this story stayed with you, if it reminded you that patience can be more powerful than anger, make sure you subscribe, because the next story I share begins with a woman who discovered a hidden bank account on her wedding anniversary. And what she uncovered next was even darker than betrayal.